you. So this is the last roundtable of the Congress. And first, we are going to hear the presentation of Rui. I believe around 20 minutes. It will be more or less the time that each of you has to do your presentation. And the name of the presentation of Rui is called 10 Years into the Fake Museum as a Cultural Heritage Assessment Model. So Rui, thank you very much. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I will try to make this brief, although I'm not too keen on images when making presentations. Sorry, I believe it's shared. Well, 10 years ago, well, to be honest, in 2010, we conceived a notion of a museum that could present elements in a different way. We were seen in or within public powers. The notion was that public powers were investing money, resources, time into creating or asserting a narrative, their own story about what was relevant in terms of the community, either historically or generally speaking, what they would consider to be heritage, cultural heritage mainly. And a specific example was a synagogue in the city of Viseu. Viseu is a small, medium-sized city in inner Portugal. And there was a building that was being stated as a synagogue. And it was based on the sole impression of a book that had been published that stated that building to be a synagogue. Despite all the authors that had studied the topic and had studied the city, having written references from the 15th and the 16th centuries stating that the synagogue could not be that building. So, despite historians, despite the documents at the time, the city considered it should be a synagogue. So it bought public markers in Portuguese, English, and Braille to state that that building was the city's synagogue. And this was, well, this isn't a sole example, and happens in Viseu as in many other countries or places. But the notion for us was that we needed to do something. We, as a group of people related mainly to culture at the time, we wanted to do something. And we started conceiving the notion of a fake museum, a museum where we could certify fake things. We would state that this was certified to be a fake, and it derived into something a bit wider. We devised a participation topic, so it is a crowdsourcing project from the beginning, and that crowdsourcing took us to a place we never expected it to bring. And in 2015, a model, an assessment model for heritage and what heritage is could be defined, and we started using it. So it's 6 years now since that model was first conceived and implemented. So this is a brief presentation of what this communication or this participation is, of course. So what is that model, the mental cultural heritage landscape, and is it alternate? Well, it is, we believe it is, but that's up for grabs, of course, and up for discussion. The notion is we have heritage as classified heritage, and each country has its own way of certifying something to be a landmark, a monument, whatever, but these are the most common terms, or the most commonly used terms. For instance, in the United States, use the notion of landmark, and the idea is each community can try to fill a report, a dossier, a request for something to be a landmark, and it can be a tree or a building, and it varies. But it's not a simple form. It is almost a report, a multiple-page report. In European countries, you have a different approach to classify something. You have an institution, generally speaking, a government institution, that defines criteria for something to be eventually eligible as heritage. So you have an administrative procedure in order to come to that point. Nevertheless, municipalities also have the power to decide what is heritage, what should be classified and thus safeguarded in terms of that territorial space, that territorial frontiers within its frontiers and within their scope of power. Nevertheless, what municipalities usually do is to certify something as heritage or as a monument or as a landmark, not by using the proper conventional powers the law gives them, but to spend money having a book, a party, an event, whatever, but not really using the powers the law gives them. So this was the stage for the fake museum. If anyone is interested, this is the link for the process. We never update it as we should, but still it's online. So we have been to 10 different territories since 2012, when we first exhibited our collection. We inaugurated on the International Museum Day in 2012. We have 76 items, and we have presented the fake museum, its scope, its functioning over 5 different countries, which is nice for something that has absolutely no funding, or had no funding until 2021. So it is a crowdsourcing well, unit, if you want to call it. But we defined ourselves basically from the start as a city museum, a city history museum, a local museum. And from Viseu, at the point, we now have two other cores from other municipalities. But we wanted, and we stated this from the beginning, we have a collection built from creations, contemporary creations, and each working, either a historian, an architect, a painter, whoever they may be, when they are invited to participate, or when people say they want to participate, we expect them to bring their own take on this topic. But we used, obviously, also from the start, the notion of simulacrum. And why the simulacrum? I will not go through this, it's all at the website. Simulacrum, because we could take the notion that people would feel they had to give a response that was serious. We try to ask people, what is heritage? What is, or what should be part of Viseu's heritage? And the answers would be the classical ones. Whatever was already stated as heritage, or wherever the municipality or the public power stated to be heritage, a monument, that was what people would say, well, that is heritage. And so we were getting nowhere. And we asked them a different question. If you had a museum, if you were in charge of bringing something into the museum, what would you bring? And they started feeling more fluid. So some respond way out of the box, things that relate only to them, to their personal view, but some really could answer as something that was relevant for, they imagined, would be relevant for themselves and for the community they were inserted in. And they were looking at this as a territorial community, not necessarily as a group of interest. And that was, we believe, the different take we could bring to the fake museum. And this was how should I say, this was the author and the notion of heritage we decided to use also from the start. Not a classified heritage, but the notion, the specific notion of perceived heritage. So as Carlos Alberto Freire de Almeida wrote in 1993, it was a small brochure, but and he was, it was an essay. So he was driving through his idea of what heritage could be. And he said something as simple, as brilliant as this: heritage is the memory of the community and is what provides a standard for its quality of life. And the notion of quality of life is interesting in terms of heritage. And more on, he said, heritage only is only truly is heritage when the community assumes it as such and becomes conscious and aware of it. So it doesn't mind if someone in Lisbon says that that should be classified and is now an asset for the Portuguese identity and heritage, because people don't know it was classified. It should be safeguarded, but well, they may look at the other side and see, I don't know, a small inscription in the ground, or someone that did the lamps 100 years ago. And that is truly relevant for that community, or at least for a group of people in that community. And that's what interested us as a whole, and that guided the Fake Museum in its process. So the how. Well, very simply, as I said before, we invited people to, well, imagine, what do you want to safeguard from Viseu's history, whatever you know, either it's present day or it has been destroyed. It can be a someone, it can be a something, it can be a building, a moment, a specific happening. Choose whatever you want to place there. And people often said, well, I want a building, but I don't know I can have a building in a museum. Well, our museum is big enough for everything. So choose a building, choose a set of buildings, choose the entire city, if you will. And people did so. Still taking their time to think about it, but they did accept the challenge. And when we explained how it could be done, we said, well, be personal. You are in charge of that museum, so bring whatever you feel must be preserved and shared with others. Imagine someone comes from outside the city. What should they see? What should they know? What shouldn't they miss? And so it started to gain motion. And the notion of a museum obviously becomes relevant because museums are considered authorities. So if a museum says so, it's almost like a few years back reading it in the news or in the paper, sorry, or watching it in the TV. If they said on TV it's real, if it comes in a book, it's real. If someone, a journalist, writes about it at a newspaper, so it must be true. And that notion also exists in museums the same way it exists in schools. So it's a very powerful institution, but we took the edge of being too serious or not allowing people to think whatever they would want to keep by stating specifically, we called ourselves the Fake Museum. And by doing so, there was no, they didn't feel they had to be too knowledgeable. They didn't feel they had to be historians. They didn't feel they had to read a standard group of books or information. They could participate simply because they wanted to participate. And that's what made the difference, basically. Except for obviously public powers. So we still have this problem 10 years into the discussion. But as we grew bigger, it's a different discussion now. So they could consider whatever they want and had to produce a proof, because museums have proof of whatever they say, it's true or real or happened. And the proof was very simple. If you don't know how to produce a painting, if you don't know how to make a building or a model of a building, well, pick up a rock in the street and say it's part of the building you imagined. And people started doing so. So it is a museum that everyone can participate into. The real notion, the real piece, the real item or asset of the museum is the story people convey. So that narrative, we wanted it to be plausible. Of course, some of them aren't. So we have aliens in Viseu, we have pieces, items from the future, we have items from before time, but that's obviously part of the process and the game. The only thing we wanted was to be connected to the territory. It had to be territorially referenceable. And we started having this. People choosing Cava de Viriato, which is a construction no one knows where it comes from. We started having outlaws, events like Feira de São Mateus on the top, which happens every year. João Torto, which is clearly a fiction, or a painting by Grão Vasco, a great painter from the 16th century, a Ribeiro writer, and on the bottom, the Cathedral of Viseu. And this all started to come. So people were choosing what we expected, obviously, and some of them did so, but also choosing things that weren't supposed to be heritage, at least not in a conventional way. By joining this, we started to look into, well, what heritage do we really have in Viseu? So in 2015, when this model was devised, there were 54 individual classified items in Viseu. So there were 54 heritage assets or cultural assets in Viseu. And most of them refer to a time where historians say Viseu was important, which was the 15th and 16th centuries. So this is what the story tells us, the history tells us. And there was very little about the 19th and 20th centuries. When we looked at our collection, at the time we had 39 items. So up until the 18th century, we only had less than 30%, so something was off. And almost all, 60%, more than 60%, related to 200 years, 150 years back, no more than that. And this, well, goes in the same way many historians and many educators feel. We have a recollection, or we have an emotional link to things that go up until our grandfathers. What is important to us is something that we can see, or we remember hearing something, remember someone speaking about. So this was also important. Heritage should be, for that people, in this notion, something they related to, not something that was too far off for them to know. So it was devised as we presented here, a group of individual perceptions, freely considered as such, and we started overlapping them to see what are they choosing? And by that registry and by that placement on a canvas, thus the landscape, we didn't have the same matrix or the same image that the official heritage had. But was this a problem of the fake museum, or was this something that really well, represented that people don't relate to the heritage as government officials or public officials state or tell us it is. And this was very important, because we do spend a lot of resources in heritage, and probably we are building a narrative about what is identity based on this choice of a public official. It soon became, when this was known, it soon became a way to call people to participate, to be more active in what they wanted to be relevant for them. And this allowed us to look at this image, to this landscape, in a different way, because we were looking, okay, they are choosing contemporary references, very close references. What way can we have? And after 6 years, the fake museum grows slowly. Of course, it grows because we only add a few pieces or a few items each year. That's our model. But the official classified assets grew even slower than us in 6 years. And we keep the same matrix as to what is official heritage, but in terms of the fake museum, we get a new proportion that will add up to the already present reading that one could have from the fake museum. So people do relate to what's close to us. People don't identify and don't know the stories. They may know the names, they may know the buildings by hearing someone speak about them, but they don't know what they are, what their history is, and what their relevance might be. Even so, because, or even more, because most of those assets, if you will, are changed over time. So each new intervention makes that building or that person or that story a little bit different. So they have less respect than we would expect them to have. What happened in 2021 that was different was for cultural heritage, natural or nature started to be more relevant. And we don't have that in terms of classified heritage, but we started having that in terms of what people wanted to preserve in a museum. They want landmarks to be natural landmarks, not a natural element that has a cultural reading, but they want it to be preserved because it is relevant for the community and for themselves as individual members of that said community. And that was the greatest difference we noted. So, sorry, I'm not speaking about the fake museum because the proposition was to speak about this model. What we did, and this was the part we thought to be relevant and important, is by not having an inquiry or questionnaire method, we took a social pressure to answer in a given way. And people were responding in a given way. So we took that out of the process. And by doing so, more than history, what keeps people imprisoned is the historiographical process. So again, books, news, and museums, they tell a story and people feel, it's not afraid, but they don't feel at ease in changing what is already stated or has been stated. When we remove the social modulation, individuals can act freely. And by acting freely, they have not only their own accord, but also their own responsibilities. And some, like in life, take their own responsibilities in a serious way. They try to answer seriously what is relevant by thinking of it, and others try to be playful, of course. And this is how we act in our day-to-day life. And another thing that was...
You have like 2 minutes.
And I'm finishing because it's one other slide after this one. Thank you. By removing the general scope, by not asking what is relevant for Portugal or what is relevant for Europe or what is relevant for the world, people could state choices they would relate immediately to. They would know what they were talking about. Either it was someone with a shop that was a wood shop, for instance, or a toy shop. And that was important for them because they felt empowered because they had knowledge about what it was. And if they didn't have, they could obtain it freely by speaking to the people or buying something. So multiple contexts, multiple smaller contexts, in our opinion, could give a better insight about what heritage could be on a wider level or regional, for instance, and then grow up into something national, instead of having someone from a government or institution saying, this is relevant for Portugal, this is part of a Portuguese identity. And that is a power, really a big power for someone to yield at will. So finally, people could fake their history. Of course, they could choose something and take it out of context, but they didn't. The dates of their creation were very similar to the dates of their own news stories, which is also interesting. Nevertheless, we have another tier or several other tiers. What does that story or that creation relate to? And that's when we find more relevant information, because this brings us almost immediately to what historians or people with a power, a political power to tell a story and to make that story present and visible, almost all of those second tier information bring us to the 20th century. So Viseu is the story the 20th century told Viseu to be. And we believe this happens in almost every single place. And that's how or why this model could be interesting if replicated. For now, and all the places it has been in, there are similar results. But this is what we are proposing, and I'm proposing here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rui. I'm sorry about being a general.
No, please.
But I'm trying to see if we in the end have time to some questions. So thank you very much for your presentation. Up next, we have Cynthia Montaudon. Please correct me if I'm saying your name wrong. With the presentation entitled Business Process Reengineering, BPR, using alternate histories. So, Cynthia, thank you very much. You also have 20 minutes and you can start whenever you like.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to be talking about particular uses of alternative histories in the area of business, specifically consulting. And this is a project by myself, Ingrid, Pinto, and Amsler. They're both teaching, so they couldn't be here. And we know that narratives and storytelling have always been at the center of change management. We have used them also for benchmarking, scenario planning, and different activities. And in consulting practices, they're kind of at the center, because this is a way in which we can elicit these ideas on others so that others participate, so that every single employee, when we're creating change in a company, can participate or feel that they're active participants. And storytelling in this particular context of process reengineering has to do with this rapid changing business environment and the pressure that it has to create dramatic improvements in business. So that's the main reason why reengineering became, at least at the beginning, so important, because it really revealed that connection to a changing environment. And business process reengineering, more specifically reengineering, became a buzzword of the 90s, just as in its time was quality, or now it's hybrid. And it could be defined as an act of recreating a core business process. So it was basically about creating radical change in organization, dramatic process improvement through process redesign. So it was not about, let's try to fix something and make it better, or a simple improvement. There were two main, let's say, statements about how it was done. So the first one is, don't automate, obliterate. And the other one was, if it's not broken, break it. So as you can see, this is really radical change that was brought about in different businesses. And it was also referred to as a quantum leap because of it changed dramatically the way in which improvement was made. And at the time it was defined as a quantum leap, there was a very famous TV program airing that was precisely Quantum Leap, that dealt with time travel. And this kind of strategy that was used to improve dramatically was a response of the United States companies to whatever was happening in Japan in terms of the quality movement, that they were very advanced in terms of total quality management, and more specifically, just in time. The problem with business process reengineering is that it has a lot of different misunderstandings, so people don't really understand what it is. And there have been a lot of, let's say, fake news right from the beginning. So one of the main authors decided to state that 70% of all projects that were applied in businesses used to fail, which there's no actual proof or evidence, but the problem is that every other author started quoting these same results. So it became like mainstream that these projects failed mostly. So for a lot of people, it was really not attractive to participate or to invest in this type of improvement project because of the high failure rate. Also, some of the misunderstandings are related to this idea that everybody thinks that business process reengineering is like burning the ships and eliminate and destroy and eradicate everything that was done before. And although it has certain aspects of destroy and rebuild, it doesn't destroy everything. It just dedicates itself to specific processes, not to whole businesses. And it also is associated, because it has so much dramatic change and so different aspects of organization that need to be modified. It has been associated with a lot of layoffs and also with unemployment. So people don't really connect to this idea of change because they see it as a negative change for organizations, especially from the perspective of the employee. It's also very high in risk and high costs, although it depends on the process, but this is the general image that it has. And for a lot of people, it takes too long to see results. So therefore, they don't want to enter into these types of organizational change. But most recently with the pandemic, it started to gain traction again, because in essence, what the pandemic did was actually eliminated and destroy a lot of previous processes that people were used to doing, just because of this dramatic change that came about. And process reengineering is basically establishing this difference between what is supposed to be and what actually is, to determine where we need to improve. And now, because of all these rapid changes, reengineering also changed, so it could be easily taken on and it would last at least less time to establish. So now we call it rapid reengineering. And it also has what is called dual path implementation, so to make it even faster. So you can implement two different actions in parallel so that the results can be seen easier. But still, a lot of people believe that implementing this type of strategy is kind of a gamble, because there's a lot of risk involved. And the reasons why this might fail, or why it frequently fails in the most of the times, is because people have unrealistic expectations. So they expect that we're going to change dramatically everything, and from now on, we will be like the top company. The problem is that this entails also a change in culture, and people sometimes don't realize that. So they just want to change the process, maybe incorporate technology, and they think that that's the solution for whatever problem the company has. But the culture is of the essence in order to implement the change successfully and to maintain it on the long run. Sometimes they also fail because of bad timing. For instance, if you were working on a reengineering before the pandemic and then the pandemic hit, well, all the project went sour. Also, sometimes they choose a too narrow or a too wide scope on what to change. If the change is too narrow, then it would not have an effect. And if it's too wide, maybe it's going to affect other areas or other processes. Also, when there's too great or too little reliance, and when the resources that are established to do the process change are not adequate. So how do we include the part of alternate histories and these narratives into the process of business process reengineering? So this is the general process. Of course, different authors include or eliminate certain stages, but these are kind of the average stages that you might take for business process reengineering. So the first part is to define the business processes that you want to change, to analyze them in detail, and then we create these alternative histories about what can be changed. And we identify and analyze improvement opportunities based on these narratives. Then comes the design of the future state process, the development of those changes, and the implementation of the changes. So of course, if you look at the traditional literature of business process reengineering, there's no space for the alternative histories. This is something that we have been doing as part of incorporating different consulting ideas into how to change the way in which people perceive business process reengineering. And we consider this narrative strategy through a push and pull from the future, so that we can have hindsight and foresight. And we use also different theories that have been about, for example, the one about the tipping point by Gladwell, that says that there are certain little things that can make a big difference and create a tipping point in which once you create that change, then everything will follow. And also we identify what Richard Thaler, Nobel Peace Prize of Economics in 2017, defined as nudges. And nudges are based on behavioral economics, and they can be different ways of nudges. And nudges are basically ways we can influence the choice we make, but without taking power from those choices. And it's done through positive reinforcement. So it's like indirect suggestions that can influence the behavior towards a decision-making process. And these nudges can be perception nudges. So how we perceive things in a way that therefore it's going to change our behavior, or what motivates us, or even the ability or simplicity nudges, which are things that facilitate the way we make the decisions because there's something that makes us feel at ease. And also in the methods, we use what is called business archaeology, because since we're going to use kind of the idea of time travel, we need to understand how businesses were at the moment. So business archaeology is like regular archaeology, but analyzing all these proofs and different artifacts that are left behind when business change comes about. We also use appreciative inquiry, although we're going to be talking about things that need to be destroyed. We make it in a way in which it's positive for the employees so that they can feel the change as something good for them. We establish collective narratives that are very compelling, although when we start developing the stories, we ask individuals to think about ideas themselves, but then we put them into groups and we create collective narratives which have more impact because everybody seems, or at least feels to be reflected in those stories. And by doing this, this provides what are called learning moments for reflection. And they really think about different scenarios. For example, we include the nightmare scenario, the worst thing that could happen or that had happened to the company so far, so that they could go kind of back and try to fix all these mistakes to create a new possible future. So we have two different ways of using these alternative stories. The first one is nightmare scenario, which is really a dramatization. We are trying to make the bad worse in an imagined past. And we start by creating a series of questions, and then we also allow the different groups to create their own questions because we don't want to direct the narrative. What we want to do is to actually let them express themselves, because in doing that, that creates kind of a therapeutic effect. They talk about their personal struggles, their problems. It also helps connect, especially if we have employees who have not been that long, who don't know the story of the business. That also helps everybody connect with one single story. And so some of the questions that we might ask is, for example, what was the general state of the business or the process when the business archaeology was done going into the past? What could you find? What was destroyed? What are the proofs that we can identify? What led to this state? What could have made the problem even worse than it was when it was found? What was the tipping point that led to these changes? And what could be affected by the problematic process? So they clearly identify all these nightmare scenarios about how much worse the situation might be in that particular process than it is today. And then with that, we start classifying different ideas. We identify main keywords. We also identify emotions and how those emotions are applied to the sense of there's something wrong that needs to be changed. And then we establish these ideas with precognition and the new change history. What are the actions that could change the business or the process history? And the good thing about this is that we can have do-overs because we're talking about a history. That when the process really is established, the business process reengineering, there's no do-over, and it's really costly. So here it's like play with different alternatives and see which one you think might work the better. We establish the new trajectories, and again, there are a lot of series of questions that might guide the process. So for instance, what should be done, what should be eliminated, what positive tipping point can be developed, and what are the nudges or these small pushes that we can use in behavioral economics to kind of incorporate this idea of change and really incorporate all those dramatic things that we saw in the negative scenarios and translate them into positive change. And here the value of alternative histories has demonstrated to create a change mindset, because people kind of see different possibilities. They see the bad things as worse than they really are. So that eases this anxiety that's created about the future or the change. So it creates a lot less resistance. It also involves people deeply in the change. They become agents of change because they are writing this future history of change. It creates better connections, so people establish personal relationships among each other. That's something that narratives in general do. And they do, in a sense, re-engineering before the re-engineering. So it's like a pre-process before this actual dramatic change is going to take place. What also brings about value is that while analyzing and doing all this business archaeology, we're bringing or making visible those elements that were invisible ones. So it really creates a lot of conscious about things that were done wrongly, things that are done right, what are the best practices, the things that we need to eliminate. So it creates a complete new mindset about how to challenge things like this, which are basically changing in a dramatic way a business process. So basically, that is what I had to present today.
Thank you very much. And thank you for being right on time. So finally, we have the Bastian Vergnon. I'm saying that okay? All right.
Yes, I hear on that name also. So I will give
so, yeah, your presentation is entitled The Alternative History of the Upper Palatinate, an example for new perspectives of local history. So you can go ahead whenever you like.
So thank you very much that I can talk about this theme about the alternative history of the Upper Palatinate as an example of for new perspectives of the local history. My name is Bastian Vergnon, and I'm also the author of the Ankerpunkte Blog, where I have written down these thoughts and arguments about these new perspectives. But first, I would like to start with two questions and answer, which I think are very important for you there in Porto. I think one of the most important questions for you is what is the Upper Palatinate and where is it? Because also most of the people in Germany, they don't know what and where the Upper Palatinate is. As you can see on this map in Germany, it is really on the outsides of Germany. But to be more detailed, the Upper Palatinate is a region in the east of Bavaria at the frontier to the Czech Republic. It is a very rural area, so with only one big city, the capital Regensburg. And to get a little bit new into what is the Upper Palatinate, I can tell you the reputation of the Upper Palatinate in Bavaria and Germany, if people know them. And when you ask some people in Bavaria about the Upper Palatinate, they use a word which I cannot translate in English because it's dialect, but it is the word for wood or for forest, but not in a very romantic way, but more or less in a very dark matter. And also the people in Bavaria say about the people in Upper Palatinate, they don't talk there with the dialect, they are barking. So that's more or less the reputation of the Upper Palatinate in Bavaria, or more in German. But for most of the people, the local history of the Upper Palatinate is only about the city of Regensburg because of its long history, because it's a foundation of the Romans, and also because it was for more than 150 years the permanent seat of the imperial diet of the Holy Roman Empire. So most of the people think the local history of the Upper Palatinate is more or less the history of Regensburg. But as you can see in this map, the Upper Palatinate is not only the city of Regensburg, Regensburg is more in the south of the Upper Palatinate, and the rest is more or less invisible for most of the people in the local history. But for this kind of problem, I think alternative histories are a very good way to bring new perspective to this kind of local history. So I've got 4 arguments. This is to clear what this alternative history can make with local history. This to clarify connections between major events and local history, to say, if we say, what if one major event had taken place in another way, we can say, where are the connection between the local history, or what if the local history had another history, had it influenced these major events? There is the part of rediscover lost parts of the local history, because many parts of this local history are not well known for the people, because they say that was a development in the past which was a failure, which hadn't been going on, and because of that it must be forgotten. And if you say, what if these failures would really be a success, then you can change the mind of the people and they can rediscover these lost parts. And for the third argument, it also, I think it helps for the actual people in the present to understand better the decisions of the people, of the policy in the past. So if you want to say, what if one decision of the policy had been in another way, you have to know why they had taken this decision. And this brings me to the fourth argument. It is also for the people in the present. If the people in the past had their alternatives, their alternative histories, then also the people in the present have their alternatives and their opportunities. But I think I can make it more clear with some examples from the history of the Upper Palatinate. So for the argument clarify connections between major events and local history, I've taken the year I don't count 20, not 1245. This is a year where the city of Regensburg becomes a free city of the Holy Roman Empire, which is for the city of Regensburg a very important date, because this meant in this time that this city was no longer part of a regional kingdom or something like that, but it means it was a free city where only the emperor had the rights to govern. So, and because the emperor was very far away, they had more or less, they could do what they wanted. But it's not only a local history for the city of Regensburg, it was a very major event also for the history of the whole of Bavaria, because at this time, Regensburg was more or less, as we can say it in the Middle Ages, was the capital of Bavaria. So this is also a very important date for the history of Bavaria. In this time, the people of Regensburg say, if we hadn't get the title of a free city in this time, then Munich wouldn't be the capital of Bavaria and wouldn't be much of a great city like it is today. And it also brings me also to the second argument. It also shows that in this time, the Upper Palatinate, or the region of the Upper Palatinate, was not only a matter of local history, because in this time, the Upper Palatinate was one of the most important parts of the Holy Roman Empire. Not only because Regensburg was a very rich merchant city, it was also because the city of Regensburg was a rich merchant city, because the whole of Bavaria was a region with many resources of iron. So many local historians say it was the Ruhr area. I don't know if this metaphor is clear for you in Portugal. There was the Ruhr area of the Middle Ages, like the Ruhr area, one of the most industrial regions in Germany now. So we can say also in this time, the local history was far more connected to the major events of the history of the Holy Roman Empire. For the second argument, the rediscover lost parts of the local history. I took the date of 1373, because this means the end of the territory of New Bohemia. So what was New Bohemia for the Upper Palatinate? It was a land bridge between the Kingdom of Bohemia, now the Czech Republic, and the cities of Nuremberg and Frankfurt, which were at this time also free cities of the Holy Roman Empire, and also very rich cities, which were only under the emperor. So the Emperor Karl IV in this time had the plan to build a land bridge between these two territories to govern both parts far more better. And that also means that in this time, the Upper Palatinate was a very important strategic territory for the whole of the Holy Roman Empire. But in this time, in this year, he was giving up the plans in favor of the Brandenburg Margraviate, because this Margraviate had won electoral vote for the election of the new emperor. So Emperor Karl IV was securing 2 votes with his Kingdom of Bohemia and the Margraviate Brandenburg for the election of his potential successor. But you can say, so because of this part, the New Bohemia is one of the lost parts of the local history, because it was considered a failure. But for this time, it was very important. And in this picture, you see a castle in the middle of the Upper Palatinate, where the emperor had also directly governed this part. So for him, it was a very important strategy to build this land bridge for this time. And so it is also a very interesting alternative history to think, what if he hadn't give up this plan and had built up this land bridge? So if we can say it for our time, maybe parts of the Upper Palatinate of Bavaria would now be parts of the Czech Republic. This is also a very interesting scenario, because the regions of Upper Palatinate and the Czech Republic had in the 20th century a history of mostly of separation, like with the Iron Curtain. And now they are trying to reconnect each other. And for this, it's also very important to know these lost parts of the local history, where both regions were quite more or less fusioned. So for the third argument, the decisions of the past, I've taken also the city of Regensburg. As you can see now in this image, this is an aerial view about the old town of the city of Regensburg, which is now considered as a World Heritage. And it is also very, for the city of Regensburg, it is very famous, and the people of Regensburg are very proud of their old town. They consider it the jewel of their city. But until the year 1978, there were plans from the city administration, from the city policy, to more or less destroy this old town in favor of a concept which was called car-orientated city. So if you imagine this this aerial view, there was the plan to build up two highways which would cross in the middle of the old town. And that was considered for 20 years to be the goal for the local policy, because this was the definition of progress in this time. So as we know, we might have to know why did the people, the city, the policy had these decisions. So then we have to clear up your mind, what was the scenario for there? So in this time, the old town, the future World Heritage, wasn't the jewel of the city, it was the downtown of the city. So there were many broken buildings. You have in this definition that really buildings were broke down in front of the people because there was no money to hold them up. And you had no really access to water, to electricity. So many people considered it progress if this old town would be replaced by a more progressive traffic concept. But only because some people of the inhabitants resisted to these plans, the old town was not destroyed. But we have to consider for the policy that until this resistance, the building of a highway in this old town was considered very logical, because it would solve the problem of the downtown. And for the last thesis, I would also say explaining the opportunities in the present. I took one event which had taken for before 30 years, so it can be considered more or less the present. It was the foundation of the Technical University of Applied Science in the cities of Amberg-Weiden in the middle and in the north of the Upper Palatinate. So there we can see that the people in this near past, more or less present, had many opportunities, because in the first place, both cities wanted to receive the approval for one university site. And there were many opportunities, many options, which the Bavarian government considered, which the local policy had considered, the local inhabitants wanted. This goes on with many urban legends, like the Bavarian Minister of Interior was a guy from the city of Weiden, and there goes the legend that he had faked a heart attack in the cabinet of the Bavaria to how can we say that, to get an argument for his city, that this city must get the university. But we can see that in this time, although these many options were calculated, there was the option that both cities profited from one university side. So the Bavarian government decided, after all these discussions, all these heart attacks, that both cities gain one university. So that the Upper Palatinate could get the university, and that most part of the region could profit from this university side. So there we can also see the lections that also in the present, the people have many options. So because I thought I had only 10 or 15 minutes, I'm at the end of my speech, but I think it is Friday evening in Germany, afternoon in Portuguese. I think nobody thinks bad of me if I'm not talking 5 minutes more. So I said, thank you for your attention. And also, I hope this advertising is okay. And also in the future for visiting my blog. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bastian. So I believe we are right on time. I'm not sure if we have any questions right now, because this is a little bit tricky because of the live streaming and all of that. But either way, as you were going through your presentations, I was making some notes for each of you, for some aspects or points that I thought were interesting. And if you don't mind, I'm going to do 1 or 2 questions to each of you. I'll do the question and then I'll give you some time to answer, if that's okay. Instead of doing all the questions for everybody, I feel like this is a much easier way for us to have a conversation. So first, regarding the presentation of Rui, I thought it was very interesting, and it reminded me of the concept of artification, in the sense that something is not considered as art, or in this case as heritage, and it goes through a process to be seen as such. This is a very common approach in France, for example, but I feel like in Portugal not so much. And I think it's really interesting because we are talking about redefining things and beings also in terms of process and context. And in this way, first I wanted to see what you think about this concept of artification, if it makes sense to you, and if you think it's something that it can relate to your project and to the specific case of Visio. And also, you talked about the participants a lot of times, and I have the curiosity to see if you can talk a little bit more about what kind of participants, what kind of people are we talking about? In terms of social class, for example, do they have a relation? I don't know. I wanted to know a little bit more about what kind of participants are we talking about, because I feel it's really important for us to understand the city also, Visio in this case. So this is the 2 things that I wanted to ask you.
Sorry. Well, first of all, please let me say I really enjoyed listening to both presentations. So there are a lot of points in common, which is very interesting to see things happening from another area or from another geography, and to see, well, what I was missing, basically. So please, thank you very much. I really enjoyed both of the presentations, as in past days, but now today I was listening carefully, or more carefully even, to this, both of them. As for your question, well, the notion that something becomes what it is, not because it is so, but because someone makes it so, Well, I believe it is present in a lot of areas. When we talk about culture and the relevance of culture, for instance, history as a whole, there's a quotation that was given to Churchill. He said, "History will be kind to me because I intend to write it." So that notion that history is what someone says it will be, or as someone makes it, is very true and has been said so for a long time, and a lot of authors assert it so. If not, there wouldn't be so many historians, I imagine, at least. There would be a lot of people interested in history, of course, but not so many historians in that sense, and political historians. One thing that is very well common to say about history of Portugal, for instance, is the courts of Lamego. So we faked a set of situations and a document to say that we were independent and truly a new nation. So this happens throughout time. The thing is, do we give it credit or not? Because it doesn't mind, at least it is not important if something is in the museum being stated as relevant if no one cares. So it could be the most important thing in the world, but if no one cares, or if no one knows what it is, its true history, true power, its true relevance, it doesn't matter to anyone, actually. So despite being relevant, or despite being within a museum. So yes, the process, I believe it happens throughout all areas of expertise. Sorry. In terms of heritage, we do have laws that regulate what heritage is and how it can be. So it is not a matter of thinking that heritage becomes so. It's a matter of actually being that way. Because you have an institute in Portugal, a general direction that says that heritage should go through an administrative process, and it should be validated by the technicians. Eventually, it gives space for people to pronounce, general people like myself, I can pronounce about something, but there's not really much I can do unless I can apprise a part of the population something not to be classified. So once again, heritage in Portugal and most countries do have laws to make it so. So again, it is a process, and we go through that. And that was part of how we started, but not through the concept of artification or heritage making, despite believing in it, of course, but because the way heritage is made so in Portugal in particular, because the project was Portuguese based. About the participants, it's a question that is recurrent in our conversations. Well, the notion is Jelinek had a golden rule that people went to politics because they had the appeal to go into politics, because they had the training to go into politics, or because they had the context that allowed them to go into politics. For instance, a son of a deputy will probably go into politics, even though he may not become a deputy or a representative himself. But these were the three lines of people coming to politics, and it becomes an oligarchy. So the same way about the participants into a cultural project. People participate because they feel or they are prone into participating. What we try to do in several places, because we were changing our method, if you will, was trying to open the possibility of participation. So people would say, well, I would like to participate, or eventually going to others that weren't artists or historians. As I said, it was relevant to know what people wanted to say about their own community, about their own street, if possible. So we were widening the pool of participants, but eventually anyone can participate. Just say so, and we will create a new fake museum around whatever place we can think of, because it is the process that interests us, not exactly the ones we invite. Obviously, there are invitations also, but the process is more relevant. And we do it playfully. So the fake museum, when we have a guided tour, for instance, by telling the stories, the fake narratives people build, we always try to say, well, this is the new state of the art. And the new state of the art, obviously, is the fake narrative people just created. Sorry. But at the same time, we say, and this will replace, and we try to tell the state of the art, the previous states of the art about that given topic. And at a point, which is very curious, people are laughing at the truth or the history that we know, and are, very serious when we are telling something fake, something new, something completely invented. And at the end of a guided tour, they often don't know what was created and what was the original history, or what historians have said about something over time. But the participants are multiple, and because no one has to provide a painting or a sculpture, as I said, people can pick up something from the street. We use the ready-made concept, of course. So one of the items, if you don't mind, I will show it very briefly. One of the items we now have, which has been our blockbuster item for this year, sorry, this is in Portuguese, is, well, simply horseshoe. A very small one, horseshoe. So we are stating, and I will translate, this is the horseshoe from the right backside leg of the pony, in which Ibn Harik is the Muslim, the Arabic name of Afonso Henriques, which was the first Portuguese king. The horseshoe from the right side leg of the pony, in which Ibn Harik tried to flee to Morocco. And there is a story about this, in which he was invited to go to Morocco by his friend when he lost one very important battle in 1169. But also there is a place called Morocco near Viseu, which very few people know. So we could build a story around this by telling what relation Afonso Henriques had with Viseu. And his friends were here, his confessor was here at the time, and he was recovering from an injury near Viseu. So people can know a little bit more about the history that unfolded around the city. And that is also interesting, but because they don't know it, they believe it's a joke. And at the end, we have to come back and tell it again. But as I said, anyone could have found this horseshoe. So you don't need to be an artist. You don't need to be someone with great talent for making objects. Just need to be able to participate. And that was the thing. We wanted everyone and anyone to be able to participate. Sorry, I will take this out. And sorry, I'm lost in the... Okay, sorry, I'm back. So that was the process about the fake museum, of course, and I was trying to speak about the model and not the fake museum in itself.
Thank you very much. Really interesting, and I look forward for knowing more about the fake museum. Congratulations. Moving on to Cynthia. I would also like to make a question, if I can call it that, because I'm not too familiarized with the topic you were talking about, but something came up in my mind as you were talking, because you referred there is still much resistance to this type of process or model. And I wonder if that would relate to the fact that there is a general ignorance of the role of alternative history. And later on, you talked about the connection between BPR based on archaeology. I thought it was really interesting, and it also made me think about the role that social science, for example, like sociology, could do in this type of process, because you were talking about making conversations with the people, collective things, and I feel like I wanted to know your opinion about integrating several areas that may have nothing to do with the basic area of the business model, for example, and how it could be effective in that process. And if so, what could be the future of these types of business that you were talking about? What do you think it still needs to be done or can be done differently in the future?
Thank you. Again, before I start, just like you said, it's really interesting to see how the ideas that come from 3 different backgrounds can actually connect between each other. So I really took a lot of notes because there are a lot of things that do connect between the 3 projects. And with regards to this, the idea, the underlying idea about this particular technique for creating change in organizations is that in this case, change is dramatic. And the more dramatic or the more big the change that you impose, the greater the resistance to change there is. If change is little or slow and people don't feel it, they just adapt easily. But here, because it's so dramatic, then it creates a lot of reaction. That's why we introduce these ideas of incorporating alternative histories so that they can make pretend before the actual change happens. And also to identify things that don't need to be changed. For example, when Bastian talked about this part of the city center possibly being destroyed because of a highway crossing over, here, this was the idea of a process reengineering, but eventually they realized, no, this is not what should be done. And this creating these alternative histories also helped to do that and say, stop, this is not the right choice of action. We must rethink certain things. That if you just go through the process as it is in process reengineering, it's not about thinking of other alternatives and then pre-doing. This is kind of do-over. You can think about it and then decide whether you want to do it or not, and how the change is going to be implemented and how it's going to be affected. And when you talked also about this business archaeology, sometimes people don't think of business as part of the regular culture of a city or of a region or maybe of a sector. But in reality, they are. And I was even thinking about creating this idea of the fake museums of business, because there are a lot of artifacts that are collected from businesses. In fact, the history of humanity has to do with tradesmen and the ways people work. And it eventually comes down to organizations and business specific types of organization. So there are a lot of things that by doing this exercise of going into the past and trying to identify particular elements that can tell us what might have happened before can actually help us project better futures, not just for businesses, but for any type of organization.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And also, for Bastian, you talked about a lot about the importance of the planning, the urban planning in these types of situations. And I feel like when we talk about planning, many of the times we are talking about financial or economical profit. Even regarding the case of the university that you were talking about. And as I don't know much about the Upper Palatinate area, it was the first time that I even heard of it. I wanted to know your opinion and what you think it could be or could have gone differently if these types of major events were oriented for other areas, for example, social areas, cultural areas. Would we be talking about a whole different Upper Palatinate area, or do you think it would be still the same problem?
Mm-hmm. No, let me first also agree to my to Cynthia and Rui. I would also be very glad if we could also connect after the conference, because I think many of the thinkings are also very important for my university, because I'm also working on the University of Applied Science in Amberg-Weiden. So I think especially the speech of Cynthia would be very interesting for our students. But let me talk. I think also as you said, the potential of, if I understand you right, the potential of alternatives for urban planning, or of the influence of this kind of plannings. I think the universities are a very good example. So maybe we can also say not only Amberg-Weiden has a University of Applied Science, but also Regensburg. And there, the people say, if there was a long history until Regensburg was getting this university, and they say, if we didn't, I've also asked the people the question, what if Regensburg didn't get the university, or would get it much more earlier than in the 1960s, like it was in the reality? And there we could see that this kind of planning was very important for the city, because in Regensburg, how could we say that? As I said, in the 1960s, the city was very small. The old town was more or less garbage, and the city was also considered as a rural city with, I think, the bishop was the mightiest person and not the major, a very conservative city. And after the university was coming, the people would get more influences from other sides, also from the students, and also the local economy was more or less in the 1980s was more and more influenced by the university, also by the people who were working there, because they would get, as you can say, they get another wind in the city, for the culture, for the economics. So this was very, very, very important. They say without the university, Regensburg would still be a little rural city. And they also said without the university, maybe there wouldn't be any resistance to the plans to make a highway through the old town, because there were many academics and many students who lead the resistance against these plans.
Okay. I just have another question to make to the three of you. Actually, it was a question about that Anna made. She sent it right now via the chat, and she wants to ask what you think of the ways that all these three projects could be combined in the super project about alternative history. She wants to know your opinion about the possibilities. I don't know if Rui, do you want to start?
Sorry. Well, if I'm not mistaken, at least in my case, when I started, What If was basically something I would have read in comics and comic books from teenage years. So that was the main notion that was an incentive to me when we started this. But yes, with time, there are a lot of different approaches using alternative realities and new narratives based on precisely that notion of what if. Business models, teaching models, well, they have become true, relevant within our city space and within the academia even. So each contribution, even though they are similar, and some of them do touch more than one would, well, it's always nice to think we're original and unique, but when they touch, it's interesting to see there are a lot of things that can be shared, because each approach has its own uniqueness. So yes, everything is translatable into a more collaborative and collective and wider effort. So in that sense, each perspective only enriches. I don't believe it takes anything from each project individually. On the other hand, it gains something from being present at a different platform with others, other thoughts, other participation, other backgrounds. So eventually, yes, of course.
I'm going to change it up a little bit. Bastian, we want to know your opinion.
I think it is quite possible to make cooperations or fusions in this field, because I think, for example, the fake museum, I'm very impressed how it involves people, normal people, as we said, not only the historians, but the normal people. This would be a very good connection to, for example, my local history, because in the Upper Palatinate you don't get many historians, but many people who are interested in their local history, and because it's their local history. I think that's also the intention behind the fake museum, which also has its local focus, and to use the knowledge of the people. And I think it's also very interesting because I have made my PhD in the theme of home or homeland. It's the German word Heimat, which is very important for the German culture and society, and also the history. So like the fake museum makes it is very emotional for the people. So I think that's a very good connection. Also with the themes of Cynthia said, because I know many people say, yes, history is nice and funny, and but what is the connection to the present? And I think that was Cynthia was talking about. It is the reality, the present, and can bring also these two kinds together.
Cynthia?
I think it all comes down to, this is culture, and these are personal connections. And narratives have that power to create these personal connections. And these connections can be translated into our past, but they also can be projected into our future. So in essence, we're all humans. We all connect to these histories, whether it relates to our local identities and things we think might have happened or we wish would have happened. And it occurs just as it would in a setting such as a special locality, for instance, or in business. It happens everywhere. And really, it's these histories and stories that connects us as humanity.
So I think we are just about on time. I want to thank you once again for participating. Give you the congratulations for all your presentations. They were wonderful. I hope to see you again someday, not virtually, physically, but we'll see. I think we're going to do a little recess, and up next we have Professor Paulo Luís Almeida. He's the director of the I2ADS Center, and he's going to do the closing remarks of the event. So thank you once again very much. We'll have a short break and we'll be right with this link soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
You're all bye.
Good afternoon. Well, it's a pleasure to be here in closing this session and closing the conference, the first conference on what if on alternative history. I hope you have enjoyed these last 3 days. I'm looking forward to see the outcomes and to review the presentations. Today, I would like to share with you some thoughts also on why we have hosted a conference on alternative history in a research institute in art and design. I think for many of us, when we are invited or when we are provoked to look at our own research from the viewpoint of an alternative history, this can be a little strange. I remember my first reaction to the invitation to think my artistic research and my artistic practice as an alternative history. My reaction was probably the same that you also have. Well, I'm not an historian. I'm not a writer. I actually don't know anything about alternative history. But after, I think, these first reactions that many of us have, we recognize that there are many things in common between areas that today can use alternative history methods, can use alternative history frameworks, can give new meanings to this provocative question, what if? As a question that allows us to look at history from a new point of view. Well, first of all, I want to address alternative history in these final remarks from the point of view of a research institute in art, design, and society, whose mission is also to promote artistic research as an impact activity or an activity with impact in society. I then want to propose a follow-up of the conference program within the frame of artistic research. Artists, performers, and designers have always worked with historical research. The reasons why they do it cover a wide range of motivations, from political and social critique to state propaganda as well, from reenactment to fiction, to bear witness of something and also to fill the gaps that are left behind. History relies in the technologies of memory, but it is also a displacement of memory. History is part of a politics of memory that can be resumed in the following sentence. Who wants who to remember what and why? And I think this question, who wants who to remember what and why, is a trigger for many of practice-based research that are dealing with historical research as well. Even in our institute, in both of the PhDs that we host, a PhD in fine arts and a PhD in arts education, we can recognize the importance of dealing with artistic research as part of as a way of creating an alternative way of thinking about it. we can recall the examples of William Kentridge and his incursions in South African recent history through his drawing and animation works that accompany the end of the apartheid system, the first elections, and the work of Truth and Reconciliation Commission in trying to show the complex tension in a post-colonial memory. More than a documentary approach, his work, like many of the works that we are witnessing in our PhD candidates, intertwine elements of fiction between historical facts, thus creating overlapping narratives with the potential of changing our perceptions of the historical events without losing the ground of historical narratives. We can also speak on the work of Grada Quilomba, that recently exhibited her installation, O Barco, the Boat, in the Museum of Art, Architecture and Technology in Lisbon. More than dealing with history as a documentary process, they are dealing with history in order to create narratives of change. And this is one of the main reasons why we have hosted this conference in our research institute, and also why I think this is an important subject, an important framework to deal with in the future. History, Walter Benjamin recalled, decomposes itself into images, not in narratives. That is why documentaries are modalities of fiction. We perceive them as links between images, testimoniums, and traces of actions. They are assemblages of actions. But not everything can be documented. That is the fatality of history. That is also why artistic research can have a responsibility as a different way of dealing with historical research. I would like also to think and to propose you a follow-up of the works that have been developed in this conference, a follow-up that can engage artistic research in its complexities, in its own way of looking, in its own way of producing knowledge as embodied knowledge, a follow-up that can prepare the next conference on alternative history next year around the same time. We would like to invite you to present also artistic work, a submission of an art practice that can deal with alternative history methods, that can cope with historical research and can look at the past, look at the memory of our culture, look at the history of our communities, and through an embodied approach, through a fine arts approach, through a performative approach, create new alternative and new disruption points that could allow us a new reading of the past. We hope this call to be launched in January. I hope we can continue this path together between research institutes, between researchers and artists from different backgrounds. It was a pleasure to have you among us in this conference, and well, farewell. Unfortunately, in these virtual days, we don't have the opportunity now to close the conference, to go out for a beer, to go out for a glass of wine, for a cup of coffee, and continue these conversations and explore different ways of dealing with history research from the point of view of artistic research. I hope briefly that we can meet again face to face. And until the next conference, I hope you stay well. Thank you.